Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. I am Robert Winfrey. I am your host, and I'm going to apologize off the bat. I tweaked my back the other day. Sucks. And so if I'm a little cranky or a little bit loopy, I'm blaming that. But hopefully I can, I'll gut through it for you guys because I don't have anything better to do on a Sunday evening than record this show at the moment. So tonight on the docket, we have a review of last night's UFC on ESPN Plus 10. If you are surprised that there was a card on Saturday, you're not alone. There was almost no promotion for this event. Very, very little. So I don't blame anyone for not being aware of it, but we'll go over it. It was all right. Largely unspectacular, but wasn't the worst. And at this point, I'll just take the 6 hours of kind of, all right, fine, as opposed to 6 hours of, dear God, why won't this end? Now, there's also the news. The UFC continues to expand its Hall of Fame class for 2019. Related to that UFC on ESPN Plus 10, we had a fight fall through because of a failed drug test. We've had some other issues, some other fights fall out, and a few fights get announced, so we'll go over all that per usual. Here with me as most of the time, I can't say always, but almost always, my regular partner in crime and advocate for the works of Ryan Reynolds in all places, Jeff Harris is with us. Jeff, how you doing?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Harris, and if you're only going to watch one dark fantasy show tonight, make it Goblin Slayer. It's streaming free on Crunchyroll right now. You all know what I'm talking about. Secondly, I'm still waiting on the props that I'm due from Robert Winfrey that he has not given me yet. So we're going to get those props today. The props are coming.
I don't have any props around me to give you, but
you are going to give me props, Robert. You owe me props.
For bringing up the possibility of Edgar and Holloway last week?
Yes.
Yeah, you did, and that's the direction they're going as of this particular moment.
I said that was going to happen. I said Volkanovski fight was not going to happen. I was right.
I imagine Volkanovski will get the winner of this fight. I honestly didn't.
It makes sense. It makes sense. So you would imagine it, you would assume it, but we cannot assume what makes sense in this sport anymore.
No, Zabit will beat another can, and then they'll catapult him into the title picture for reasons. We'll get to that later.
History is on my side.
Oh no! The UFC does not in any way, shape, form, or fashion conform to things that make sense.
So I want my props for pointing this out.
I had forgotten about the existence of Frankie Edgar after he disgusted me as a human being. Congratulations.
What did he do? Did he write a book that was worse than Matt Hughes' autobiography?
There is no way anyone could write a book worse than Matt Hughes' autobiography.
Well, then what did Frankie Edgar do to piss?
He's palling around with Ramzan Kadyrov, and that disgusts me.
Oh, one of those kind of warlord dictator types.
Yeah, I mean, who only has a governmental policy of torturing homosexuals to death.
I mean, hasn't Conor McGregor done something similar?
Yeah, and it disgusted me when Conor did it. And look, I don't like it when someone like Khabib does it. Khabib also lives next to the guy. Like, there's genuine ramifications if you live within that area for pissing off people like for pissing off murderous dictators. I understand that.
I don't know too much about the Edgar situation with Ramzan Kadyrov.
He did it because his manager told him to.
Well,
and his manager's a scumbag too.
Let's be honest. Ali Abdelaziz is not the most, let's say, sterling representative of this sport. I think you would agree with that.
You put that about as kindly as it can be put. Anyway.
And I like Frankie, so it disappoints me to hear,
And look, I got pissed off when Verdum did it again. I understand someone like, again, Khabib, because that guy might have the political reach to have you killed. If you live in Jersey, I don't think you have an excuse.
But other fighters have, like, I think John Jones, Frank Mir,
Oh yeah, a lot of them took money from this
Weidman
guy.
have, accepted like the red carpet treatment from basically dictators.
Oh yeah, he's a dictator.
And such.
And I don't like it when any of them do it. I mean, look, I gave up hope on John Jones as a human being a long time ago. Like, I care about him in the cage, that's it.
All right.
And then Fabricio doing the same thing just doesn't really surprise me.
Frankie is likely getting the title shot.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the details about what card that's rumored to be on and whatnot in a bit.
But let's at least Rafael dos Anjos and Kevin Lee did have a good fight last night. So there's that.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad as far as main events go. So yeah, the main event, Rafael dos Anjos defeats Kevin Lee via arm triangle choke in the fourth round. Not the first. I had dos Anjos up 3-0 going into the fourth. I don't think I was in the majority there. I think there were a few people who gave Lee.
I think I gave Lee the first.
There's an argument for him taking the first. The first was a close round.
I felt like, honestly, I felt like a couple of those rounds were close-ish, but I leaned toward dos Anjos.
Yeah, realistically, if Lee had been able to do anything more effective with his time holding dos Anjos against the fence, I would have given him those rounds.
He was not effective against the fence.
But he really struggled to get...
Dos Anjos ended up scoring more takedowns, did he not?
Oh, yeah. Dos Anjos got 5, I think.
Yeah.
4 or 5.
He tried the pressure game in the first round, which we talked about last week, but I wouldn't say Lee is a bad gas tank, but he couldn't maintain that pace past the first round.
Yeah, again, at 155, he pretty clearly had gas tank issues. At 170, I think he just overestimated what he was capable of,
right?
Or underestimated the resistance that dos Anjos was going to put up, because he went really hard in that first round and a half. He was really going after things.
Dos Anjos looked really good. He looked about as good as we've ever seen him last night, too.
Yeah, he did a good job avoiding being taken down. He didn't get phased too much by the punches he got hit with. He fought. I mean, he has a great clinch striking game. It's the Robbie Lawler fight being the best example of it. He just does really solid work from the clinch when you give him anything approaching the time and space to do so.
And he's very well rounded. That's another thing.
Yeah, he has really good takedowns. I mean, again, this is the most takedowns that Kevin Lee has given up ever.
And Lee's a wrestler.
By trade, yeah. So I enjoyed the fight for what it was. It wasn't the flashiest fight, but these were two high-level guys who very clearly had their particular game plans. And in the case of dos Anjos, he just had a better one and was able to implement it better. He just kind of let Kevin Lee really fight hard for about 7.5 minutes and then tire himself out. And then capitalized as the fight kept going on. This still doesn't put dos Anjos back in the title picture yet. He's going to have to fight again. I don't know who. I've seen Leon Edwards kind of tossed around.
Fight. Leon Edwards makes a lot of sense right now, actually.
Yeah.
Because dos Anjos has those 2 back-to-back losses,
And true, and it's both a blessing and a curse that it's to Covington and Usman, because you've lost to the number 1 and number 2 guy, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But you've also lost to the number 1 and number 2 guys.
You could do Stephen Thompson. You could do Darren Till.
Yeah, those are possibilities.
Now, what is the status of Ponzinibbio right now? Because, Ponzinibbio is good, but it seems like something is always happening with him, like he gets hurt or something.
I think they're kind of looking at him to be in the main event or heavily featured on that Uruguay card.
Okay.
No one's really been attached to it, but
you would agree he's due for a big fight.
Oh yeah. Overdue, actually. 2 fights ago, he was due a really solid opportunity that just, for reasons, never came to be.
Darren Till might not be a bad idea here.
Till's an option. Again, Edwards kind of got tossed about because Leon Edwards is kind of due a shot nearer the top.
I agree.
And Dos Anjos might be the guy that is in that position. So,
Well,
again,
I would say welterweight is pretty solid right now, though.
it's a really solid division, yeah. You're not hurting for options.
We do have a lot of good options moving around there, and there's a lot of up-and-coming talent as well. If you wanted to do a rematch, you could do Pettis. I'm not really keen on that one.
They announced Pettis' next fight.
Who's Pettis fighting again?
Well, take this for whatever it's worth, but they've announced him and Nate Diaz for the Anaheim card.
How did I totally that? I think in my mind, I don't even believe that fight's real.
I feel about it like I feel about every other UFC fight at this point. I'll believe it when they get in the cage.
Yeah, so
I'm done getting really hyped about
that
fights.
In mind, we should probably keep Dos Anjos on deck as a replacement for Diaz, don't you think?
Well, he's beat both of those guys, so you could do the rematch at 170.
Exactly.
And frankly, I think he'd beat them again. He's just a terrible style matchup.
That was one of my favorite performances ever, when he was literally slapping Diaz around.
Oh, that was so great.
Give Diaz a bit of the whole Stockton slap.
Nate came in really heavy for that fight too, if I remember correctly.
I believe he did come in heavy for that fight.
So yeah, keeping Dos Anjos either on deck for one of those higher profile fights that could have issues coming up, or
honestly though, I think if hypothetically, if he were to face Till, I think he's a horrendous matchup for Darren Till.
I don't know. I'm torn on that one just because if RDA is the one going forward, yeah, he's a nightmare for Till. On the other hand, RDA is one of the best fighters in the world going forward. Going backwards, not so much. And Darren Till is really good about applying forward pressure.
He hasn't been that good lately.
I mean, he's on a bad streak, but...
Well, I mean, that's why this could be an interesting fight, because Dos Anjos was on a bit of a bad skid for a little bit there, and he snapped it, and Till needs to get out of the doldrums. So I find that interesting. But it depends on how they want to match these guys up next. They might want to give Till a softer touch, but...
I mean, frankly, if I'm Till, I might try my hand at middleweight.
True.
I mean, again, maybe not forever, but at least a fight, just see how things feel. I don't know what you do with Kevin Lee now. I mean, there's plenty of guys at welterweight for him to fight, but this is what, his third...
Could start the 165 division.
I mean, I'd be okay if they did, frankly. I mean, yeah, Lee is 1-3 in his last 4. Just not in a very good spot.
It feels like he's plateauing a little bit right now.
Yeah, I think he needs a change of scenery a little bit, and I don't want this to come across as insensitive, but when Robert Follis passed, I think a lot of his success came from the connection that those two had, and Follis was really a guy who kind of understood Lee and understood how to maximize him. And since he lost that, I think he's kind of been floundering a bit in the preparation and coaching stand.
Whoever thinks was the same with Sam Stout and Sean Tompkins?
And there were a few guys with Tompkins that were kind of like that.
Right.
Horodecki. Sorry, not Horodecki. I mean, Horodecki too, but for different reasons. God, who was that guy who just Jose Aldo?
Sam Stout was never an elite guy, but, you know, he had his moments in the UFC.
Yeah, Stout did. God, who was that guy that Jose Aldo just clubbed to death in his first UFC fight?
Hominick? Mark
Hominick. That's it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another guy who just very, very... And again, when you get coaches and fighters that have that kind of relationship, it's a tough thing to move on from in a lot of respects. So I think, I mean, Lee's a young guy, which is kind of the only saving grace in some respects, I think, for him at this point. He's only 26.
If he can still grow, he still has time to grow if he applies himself.
Yeah, I think when he finds the right coach, the right coaching situation, there's clearly a lot of potential, but he's got to figure that out because right now I don't think coaching, his coaching and preparations is doing him a lot of favors.
But considering how obstinate UFC is about having title fights for main events, for what have you, that's why I believe sooner rather than later they're going to create new weight classes. And because Dana White says they're never going to do it, that just makes me think even more they will do it at some point.
Yeah, and again, 165 is probably the best one you can have if you get the talent pools at welterweight and lightweight are deep enough to accommodate that, and moreover, if you get guys that will just move between them as necessary.
Because look, Kevin Lee, he's obviously too big for lightweight at this point, because he's cutting too much weight for lightweight, and he's probably a little too undersized for welterweight. You would probably agree with that.
Oh yeah, he is. One's like he and Dos Anjos both, like 165 is actually I think their optimal weight.
Not that, and look, I don't know how much time Anthony Pettis realistically has yet for his career, but he'd probably be in that same boat.
He'd try his hand at it, but Pettis has always been at his best at lightweight. He just had other issues, like the game just passed him by.
Yeah.
No, there's a few guys that fall into that category. Jorge Masvidal would probably do a lot of work at 165.
I mean, you say that, but he's one of the top guys he's been consistently one of the top guys at welterweight recently.
And he's also been visibly undersized. I mean,
yeah.
he fights through it.
I mean, look, it's MMA. It's not a size contest. And the bigger fight, we've seen time and time again, the bigger, stronger fighter isn't always going to win. And sometimes being the bigger guy can be just as big of a mark against you as a benefit. We've seen that frequently.
Okay, it's certainly not the only thing, but again, I think Masvidal at 165 would probably, again, that's probably about his ideal weight class given his frame. So there's a lot of guys who could try their hand at that. So, I mean, heck, Khabib could probably would probably be very successful at 165.
How do you want to tackle the rest of this card?
I don't mind just doing quick hits. There's not a whole lot else worth really diving into here.
I agree.
Ian Heinisch defeated Antonio Carlos Jr. via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. Initially, I scored this a draw. I gave Shoeface a 10-8 first, which was a marginal call on my part, but I felt okay about it. Heinisch kind of came out of nowhere and is really he's only had 2 fights in the UFC, but he's beaten Cesar Ferreira and Antonio Carlos Jr. and that's a rough 2-fight stretch in the UFC, and he's gritted through some tough spots in both fights. He might be someone to kind of pay attention to because there's a lot I'd like to see his game evolve through, but he clearly knows how to fight, and he clearly has a lot of potential. Felicia Spencer defeated Megan Anderson via rear naked choke in the first round. It is time to abandon the Megan Anderson hype train for those of you who were on it. She makes shockingly bad decisions defensively, especially on the ground. Just really, really bad. I don't know what's going to happen. Featherweight is in a very weird spot in that there's not really a division. The UFC just hosts fights within it a couple of times. So we'll see. I mean, Cyborg seemed interested in fighting Spencer. And if you're going to continue having a few fights within 145, you may as well. I mean, Cyborg's basically your only quasi-attraction if Nunes sticks by her statement that she's never fighting at 145 again. Vicente Luque defeated Derek Krantz via TKO in the first round. Krantz took this fight on fairly short notice. Luque was supposed to fight Neil Magny in the co-main event. Neil Magny failed a drug test. We'll maybe get into that a little bit more later. He was pulled out. Krantz steps in. Krantz came out guns blazing, and he took it to Luque for about a minute and a half. But after Luque just kind of weathered the storm, he turned on the offense, and Luque's a very underappreciated fighter. I mean, he has like 2 losses in the UFC. He's now on a 5-fight winning streak. It's pretty insane. He's like 9-1 in his last 10, and that 1 loss is to Leon Edwards. Luque, again, I understand he was supposed to fight a bigger name in a higher profile situation here. I hope they try to give him another shot along those same lines. Luque might have actually. I think Luque, after his win, said he'd be willing to fight in the main event for the Uruguay card, which would be which is theoretically him and Ponzinibbio, which I'm fine with that fight. I give both. That's a good opportunity for both guys.
Luque is another one of those young rising guys who just kind of came out of nowhere. Now he's got 5 wins in a row, and I think he's got a pretty impressive resume overall. I think that's.
Yeah, he's again like 9-2 in the UFC.
9-2.
He lost his.
Yeah.
He lost his debut to Michael Graves, but he won 4 in a row after that. Lost to Edwards, and now has won 5 in a row.
I mean, no matter which way you slice it, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Even against, some of those opponents are lesser opposition, but to get 9-2 at welterweight in the UFC, like you're due for some bigger fights, definitely.
Charles Oliveira defeated Nick Lentz via TKO in the 2nd round. I don't know why we did this again. I genuinely don't understand why they booked this 3rd fight between these two. The other 2 weren't. I get that the illegal knee in the first fight was what caused it to change into a no contest. They waited years to run it back anyway. Oliveira won without. I mean, he finished him in the 3rd round. This was just a weird fight. Oliveira wins again. I don't know. Give Oliveira someone who's, in the top 15. If we're going to do so, I mean, for God's sake, Charles Oliveira is still not even 30 years old. And he's been fighting forever. But let's try moving this along a little bit instead of just wasting time.
Into the UFC really young.
Yeah, very. And didn't he beat Evan Dunham and
yeah,
Efrain Escudero back to back?
He did.
God, it was forever ago.
That was back in 2010. Jeez.
9 years.
Drives me crazy that 2010 is 9 years ago now.
Dude, I still know people who think that the 90s were 10 years. That the 80s were. 10 years ago was not actually the 90s.
I think the good news is that Oliveira has settled in at lightweight. I would just like to see him step up and fight. See if he can fight and beat higher level competition again.
I heard Gregor Gillespie bandied around as something that just other fans were saying, and I'd be all for that, man. No one wants to fight Gregor.
Nothing against Nick Lentz, but come on. He's kind of mediocre. He's done enough to hang around the UFC, but he tends to trade wins, or he'll win 2, lose 1, win 1, lose 1.
Yeah, he's kind of a 500 fighter at this point in the UFC.
Let's see. I mean,
recently, if nothing else. He just kind of goes back and forth, and about the level of opposition he's going to beat. You know about the level of opposition that's going to beat him.
Right.
I hope
we never see this fight again.
Yeah, I didn't think it made sense this time. We don't need a 4th. Davi Ramos defeated Austin Hubbard via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Decent enough stuff from Ramos. He's got power. He's a phenomenal grappler, and he had Hubbard rocked a couple of times. Ramos has developed a pretty decent left hook. His right still needs work, but that left hook he found on occasion, and Again, his grappling is obviously top notch. So, what's he done lately? He's on a winning streak, I think. Yeah, 4. Yeah, 4 in a row. He's 4-1 overall in the UFC. It might be time to move him up a little bit from the other like debutantes. I mean, he lost to Chris Grutzmacher. He beat Chris Grutzmacher, Nick Hine, John Gunther, and Austin Hubbard. Like, okay, we know he can beat that level. Let's, again, I'm not saying top 15, mind you, but let's get him a step up in competition. On the prelims, Aspen Ladd defeated Sijara Eubanks via unanimous decision, 30-26, 29-27, 29-28. This was all right. This was technically your fight of the night, which I think is more telling about the rest of this card than anything else. Aspen Ladd keeps on trucking. She's 8-0 now. I don't know who you would give her next specifically, but someone else in the top 10. Like, she was number 7, I think, coming into this fight. So let's get her someone else on about that level of playing field here, because her UFC wins are what? Tanya Evinger, Sijara Eubanks. I think there's one more, but it might just be those two. Let's just kind of bump that up a little bit. Desmond Green defeated Charles Jourdain via unanimous decision. Meh. Michel Pereira, the wild man, defeats Danny Roberts via knockout, flying knee and punch 1 minute and 47 seconds into the first round. There's a highlight of this guy that's on Twitter. If you look up Grabaka Hitman's timeline, and you'll see it. This man is an absolute insane human being in the cage. He did an honest-to-God lion salt onto somebody. Jumped halfway up onto the cage, put his hands on the top, and did a backflip off the fence. This guy's nuts. Again, knocks out Danny Roberts. Danny Roberts is not an easy out, and he befuddled him and then cold-cocked him, so good on you, Pereira. Grant Dawson defeated Mike Trezano via rear naked choke in the second round. Dawson's striking is not good. Trezano's grappling is not all that good, but Dawson's a grappler and Trezano's a striker, so it just kind of played out. Ed Herman defeated Patrick Cummins via TKO in the first round. At least it ended quickly. Zach Cummings defeated Trevin Giles via guillotine choke in the third round. I had Cummings down in this fight, and he cracked Giles with a left, then grabbed that choke up as they were kind of going down, and solid enough performance out of Cummings. And then kicking everything off, Julio Arce defeated Julian Erosa via head kick knockout in the third round. Good finish from Arce. It's a shame he didn't get a bonus for that one, because that was a nice kick. It was a really nice kick. All right, Jeff, any burning desires you have from that group of fights?
No.
All right. Thanks to those of you who stopped by and followed along live or read after the fact. Again, this was a badly promoted card. I can say that fairly safely at this point. There's always a couple of people who, it seems, for these smaller cards wind up going, wow, I didn't even know this was on until I checked 411 and saw that it was that, oh, hey, coverage. I think ESPN has a pretty clear, they know which events they're going to put promotional effort behind and which ones they're not. And fair play to them if that's what they want to do. I'm not in a position to dictate a multi-billion-dollar sports promotion and how they do those kinds of things. But this was definitely a card that, again, like, there were a lot of mismatches on this card. There were like 3 fights that were nearly 10-1 odds, and one of them that was like 12-1 favorites.
I got to be honest, though. I cannot get over the ESPN Plus service and how many commercials there are.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of commercials because they sell ad time.
I'm not... Like, it's a premium service, and if you pay for cable satellite, I mean, yes, there are networks with commercials, but like, you're paying for like a package of channels, right? And it just doesn't seem to make sense to me to have all these commercials during a premium paid streaming subscription service. Am I being unfair here?
No, you're not the only one who doesn't like it.
I don't get it. Now look, I would understand if they had like some paid sponsor ads during like the show, like WWE has from time to time in the past.
No, they've got those too.
UFC has those. I just don't get this. Like why? It just seems it's not doing a great job of selling me on the service. And UFC Fight Pass, Robert, for all its flaws, did not have this, as I recall.
No, it did not. Also, they couldn't have sold ad space on Fight Pass if they wanted to.
Well, why was that?
It's a small service.
Right.
This is ESPN Plus. There's plenty of people who pay a lot of money to be advertised on the networks of ESPN. That now just includes ESPN Plus.
It seems counterintuitive to me.
I don't like it. I don't disagree with you. I am pointing out the again.
Where does all the money go anyway?
I mean, do you want a financial breakdown of how ESPN spends their income?
I would.
That is available.
I mean, they're a publicly traded company, are they not?
Yeah, if you want that, you can find it.
They're a division of the Walt Disney Company.
Yeah, that is available information if you'd like to find it.
Okay. It's jarring and it's annoying that we're paying for this subscription service. That's not main ESPN, and we have to get all these commercials.
ESPN's also going to wind up. I mean, streaming is the future, so they're just going to wind up. I mean, within the next 15 years, every streaming service will have ads.
Right.
That is something of an inevitability.
Look, if you just about any streaming service that's ad supported, and that's fun because you're viewing the content in a browser, ad supported, but you're getting it free. However, you can pay extra to get a no ad experience.
I don't think Hulu does that.
I think they used to do that. I'm not sure what they do anymore.
Neither are they.
I think everything on Hulu almost everything is behind a paywall now.
For a while they used to have completely free content, and then you could pay for Hulu Plus. But even when you paid for the subscription, you still had ads.
And
so they just moved everything behind the.
Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I do plan on getting Disney Plus at the moment, but if they're going to pull similar things, I'm going to be very annoyed.
I think Disney Plus is a bit more in the Netflix kind of basic setup in that.
You would hope. Would you not?
Well, again, they're not going to be. I think one of the major differences here, if you rewatch even stuff I think on ESPN Plus, even if you rewatch old events, they cut out the commercials.
Do they?
I think they do. I'd have to double check that.
I haven't checked that far yet, but
there's not enough. There's not a lot of them on there right now.
Commercials are a huge drawback for me. Huge.
I imagine anything that you're accessing through the archives on Disney Plus will be ad free, but any of their new stuff might have a commercial break between episodes or one or two throughout a particular episode. Just depending on how they want to do it, because again, the issue that ESPN Plus is running into is that they are broadcasting things, not simply providing access to them after the fact.
I just wish I was in the meeting where they made this decision, and I could have been the dissenting voice in the room, why do we want to do this? It's our premium service.
I mean, I think Amazon Prime, when they stream sporting events, has commercials.
Amazon Prime will have they don't have the ads during the show. They'll have it, and what I do see on Amazon Prime is it's at the front, and it's mostly their own stuff, as I recall.
I haven't watched streaming a live stream of something on Amazon Prime for a while, so I
They do have ads, but but they don't interrupt the program.
I'd have to double check. I also know that again, there's a slight difference between broadcasting something live and rewatching it after the fact, as far as what they might be contractually able to do because I mean, again, they're paid a lot of money by a lot of people to be advertisers on their programming. If there's 2 million or so subscribers to ESPN Plus, which I believe is the number they floated, then there's 2 million or so people that are not that if they don't run those ads, they could open themselves up to some sort of litigation from the people who are paying hundreds of millions of dollars a year to have their advertisements run on ESPN networks.
Do what they want to do, but still annoys me.
Again, I'm not a big fan of it either. Okay. So, all right. Let's see. There is no event this coming Saturday. I have no idea what I will do with that 6 hours of my Saturday. More like 7.
Nap, play with your dog.
I don't know. I will do something. I will not just
cooking. You can watch some cooking channels on YouTube. I like Sam, cooking guy.
Yeah, that's what you do. That's not. That's less my thing.
You can take a cooking class. Learn how to cook some biscuits with chorizo gravy.
Ugh, I don't care for chorizo. All right, but we do have a few bits of news to talk about. Last night, the UFC announced the latest inductee into the Hall of Fame for the class of 2019. This case is going to be former light heavyweight champion Rashad Evans, who will be going in as well. And I think the best way I saw this described, I believe this was Luke Thomas. I'm not entirely sure what the criteria are for the UFC Hall of Fame at this point, how much of your work has to be done under the UFC banner for you to be qualified for it, how much they consider people from outside of it, because they do have a few people who had very minimal UFC fights who were in. I mean, Bas Rutten's in, and he had like 2 fights in the UFC.
Got into the Pioneers wing.
Yeah, and again, I'm just not. So again, the point being, I'm not quite sure how everything, all of the selection process for the UFC Hall of Fame. That said, Rashad Evans was a very important figure for a lot of the UFC audience, and I have no issues whatsoever with him going in.
Oh.
I mean, you have a former champion who was also involved in a couple of the larger pay-per-views that were sold. He
debuted Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Rampage,
Forrest Griffin,
Bisping, Dan Henderson.
There's a lot of guys that he beat that were very, very good. Had some very memorable finishes. I mean, everyone points to the Sean Salmon and Chuck Liddell knockouts they're on highlight reels to this day.
Some of the biggest fights in UFC history. It's undeniable. Rampage versus Rashad was a huge fight at the time.
That was for a long time like one of the most purchased pay-per-views ever. It was like number 2 or 3. That did a lot of business.
Championships, he was not that successful. He got the win over Forrest, and then he immediately lost it to Machida. And that was it was about 10 years. It was 10 years ago now, but that knockout was one of the most memorable knockouts in UFC.
Oh yeah, that was Lyoto Machida's.
How can we forget the stanky leg?
I mean, I maintain that was Lyoto Machida's best performance. Like that fight against Rashad was the pinnacle of Lyoto Machida's.
Make an argument that compared to Rashad Evans, Machida probably deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame too.
He'll get there eventually, I'm fairly sure, barring some massive falling out with management. I mean, he's in Bellator right now, I know, but I don't think there was a lot of bad blood.
All right. Probably mainly with USADA. But, he kind of beat Chuck Liddell sort of on the downside of his career, but that did sort of put him. That was basically a title eliminator.
Well, I mean, right. I think we only look back at that as being on the downside of Chuck's career, kind of in hindsight.
Yeah, but Chuck had already lost a couple times at that point.
And he lost to Rampage and he lost to Jardine. But
yes,
this was the fight.
Lost to Keith Jardine.
Hey, Jardine had I can't say Jardine was hugely successful. No, hang on. No, I'm not going to say he was hugely successful.
Dramatic. That was a pregnant pause.
But Jardine had a successful UFC career, all things considered. And Jardine beat some tough guys.
He had a couple. I would say more or less he had a couple notable wins. Considering his drawbacks, he did okay for himself. I'll say that.
Yeah,
but
I mean, he overperformed relative.
No. Liddell was coming. At that point, Liddell was coming off of his win, and they were ready to give Liddell another title shot if he had won that fight.
Yeah, the winner of that fight was going to fight for the belt.
Right. So he won that fight, and then
he
forced.
And Rashad knocked, like, that's the fight that really is, like, that's the last. Yeah, that's when we all should have known it was done for Chuck, because woof, was that a knockout.
Right. I mean, his run to the. Once he got to the top, it was pretty impressive. It just kind of.
He was undefeated.
He stayed at the top of the division for a few years after that.
Yeah, after the Machida loss, he still turned back some other. I mean, he's the one who derailed a lot of the Phil Davis momentum. Was their 5-round fight on Fox?
Totally derailed Phil Davis.
Phil Davis still hasn't recovered in a lot of ways.
No, I think you're right. Knocked out Chael Sonnen for whatever that's worth.
Oh, that was so great to watch. He just smashed Chael.
Beat Dan Henderson when Dan Henderson was really one of the top contenders at light heavyweight still. So, yeah. He had a fairly eventful career. It's just unfortunate. Like, once he kind of hit that wall, he dropped really quick.
Yeah.
We had to see him lose to Sam Alvey.
Yep.
And
Dan Kelly.
And he waited way too long to go to middleweight. Way too long.
Yeah. He definitely overweighted for that, and then
because the UFC, they were actually asking him to move down to middleweight to fight Anderson.
Yeah, not too long. Like, after he lost the light heavyweight title, there was a lot of talk about him being a little bit on the smaller side, especially after the Rampage fight when Rampage was visibly larger.
And John Jones.
Yeah, and then John smashed him.
And then I interviewed him for the website when he fought Nogueira, and that was, I think, the Nogueira loss is basically what derailed those plans. And then Anderson ended up fighting Chris Weidman, and the rest is history.
Yeah, so I have no issues with him going into the Hall of Fame. Yeah, good, and he seemed genuinely moved by the announcement because he was cage side for this event. He's from Niagara Falls, I think. Right.
And he's been a fairly good. I would say he's been a fairly good ambassador from the sport. He's a good analyst. He's been an analyst almost as long as he's been a fighter in the UFC, and he's done a good job with that.
Yeah, they put him on the analyst desk, and he does a really good job for that.
He brought MMA broadcasting to ESPN years before this ESPN deal, Robert, with MMA Live, which was a good show.
I don't think I ever watched it.
But
I'll take your word for
it. That was sort of like their MMA analyst show. And
wasn't that like him and Gilbert?
Who?
Wasn't that him and like Gilbert Melendez or something?
Gilbert Melendez, I think, was on there. No, it was mainly Rashad and who else? Who's play-by-play now?
Oh, Anik?
Yeah, John Anik.
Okay.
It was John Anik was like the main host, and
Florian would be on it from time to time, I seem to recall.
Yeah, it was usually like Florian or Rashad-ish. But yeah, it was a good program for its time. I think it was really the Fox deal that killed that show. Basically.
Yeah, probably. Fox deal killed a lot of stuff.
But I mean, they for a while they were on ESPN too. So just think about that. They got MMA onto ESPN well before this broadcast deal got sorted out.
And Rashad does a lot of coaching now with
yeah.
He's part of what is it? Henry Hoof's team. I think Hard Knocks 365.
Right.
It was one of those camps that sprung up after the Black Zillions fell apart.
Black Zillions was falling apart from the beginning. So
yeah, after it officially dissolved, he does a lot of work with them. I mean,
Yeah.
he and Kamaru Usman are apparently pretty close.
I mean, despite his lack of title success, I don't think you can really argue too hard against him getting this induction.
All right.
So here's the news I was referencing earlier. This is not official, but the word is from ESPN is that Max Holloway and Frankie Edgar have both verbally agreed to a featherweight title fight for the Edmonton card in July.
240, right?
Yes, this is 240. It's not confirmed. It hasn't been announced yet, but this appears to be the direction they're going in. And I guess because Volkanovski, he's still last I read, he was still hospitalized from.
I believe they mentioned he was going to be discharged today, I think.
Was he assaulted by some Brazilians after beating Jose Aldo? Did they?
No, just got a blood infection.
Are we sure this wasn't foul play here?
I mean, I'm not going to say it's a complete impossibility. The universe is a crazy place, but
are we sure it's safe for him to stay down there? They might not let him leave.
Well, he was in Chile. He was hospitalized in Santiago during a layover. When they left Brazil, he was complaining about just general pain and some swelling in his feet.
I mean, I hope it's not serious and he doesn't have a blood clot or something.
Apparently, again, he's responded well to treatment. He seems to be, his manager mentioned they were looking at discharging him, I think,
what causes
today.
a blood infection, Robert?
Depends on the type of infection.
Do they know the cause here?
Not that I'm aware of. They traced it, I think, the location back to just a cut he had on his foot that just got infected.
Okay, so it's like an infection from a cut.
Well, there's different kinds of infection, and a lot of that depends on the bacteria or the virus. I think in this case it was a bacteria that you pick up.
When you when you have a cut, you have an open wound in your body that's basically exposed. There's germs in the air. There's germs and bacteria in the air, and once you have a cut, it can easily get in. It could easily get into your bloodstream or your body. Or am I totally off here?
No, and again, I don't know specifically what he had. They said blood infection, which does limit down these, because different types of bacteria will live in the muscle tissue around around there.
Aldo fans did not intentionally pass along this bacteria.
I mean, look, it's a well-known fact that the mats for training in Brazil are just soaked in staph. Sorry, bad joke. But
so this could be similar to something like staph.
Well, I mean, staph is a bacterial infection. It just behaves differently because staph is more localized by and large. It does spread throughout the body, but it can
get very serious though.
Oh yeah, staph can. And blood infections are very serious too. That will kill you relatively quickly if unchecked because it travels throughout the entire body rather than being localized to an area. So when they landed in Chile for a layover, he just there was still something wrong with one of his feet. It was very swollen. It was very red. So they checked him into a hospital. They kept him for a few days. They gave him a course of treatment. He seems to be responding well. And again, last I heard, which was reports from his manager, they were looking at discharging him either. I want to say it was today. I saw this last night. So it would be today or tomorrow that he's probably going to be discharged and then returned home to Australia.
Now, with all that in mind, I can kind of understand booking Edgar versus Holloway again. However, this fight has already been booked twice before, and it's already fallen through twice before. So I hope it doesn't happen again if they are going forward with it this time. Especially because this card is set for my birthday.
Yeah, I'm generally nonplussed by the fight. I think the first time they booked it, I was pretty up for it because
it made sense at the time.
It not only made sense, Frankie asked some questions of Max that I had not seen him answer.
Okay.
That's not the case anymore.
Okay.
This is... Oh, God. I don't want to say this is an easy or a get-well fight for Max because it's Frankie Edgar. Like, Frankie Edgar is not an easy fight for anybody.
He's no joke.
But after the war with Poirier, Frankie is unlikely to deal the same kind of damage that Dustin is.
I won't go
and
that.
Let me be clear.
Okay.
Frankie can win the fight. I'm not denying that. And Frankie's been known to Frankie will bring war if necessary. But he's not known for tremendous punching power. He's not known for blood and guts brawls. I mean, not to say that he can't do that. Hang on. Not to say that those don't exist on his resume. We can find them. That is not the average Frankie Edgar fight.
What I would say is this. I heavily favor Holloway in this fight.
Ditto.
I could be wrong, but even after even considering I was wrong about the Poirier fight, I still favor Holloway here.
Yeah, I favor Max.
But we'll see.
I wouldn't say heavily, but I'm not without too much reservation.
I don't accept any fight except the title fight next.
Yeah, Volkanovski's... I mean, even after the fight with Aldo, he mentioned the upcoming... Because there's an Australia card in August, I believe, is what they've announced.
Well, if this fight's happening July 27th, there's no way either guy would fight in August.
Barring a really fast finish, and neither guy is known for that either. Let me double check, make sure I have my dates right. October, excuse me. It's October 5th is the Sydney card.
October, maybe I could see it turning around, but let's see if Holloway can make this weight cut again without issue, because he just fought at lightweight. So we have to wait and see on that. Because Holloway's career was in a bit of a
weird spot. Like
it was questionable. I was very worried for a little while that he might never fight again.
Yeah, there was some weirdness there. That said, a card headlined by Whitaker versus Adesanya with a co-main event of Volkanovski and Holloway that's a darn good 1-2 punch for the top of your card, especially for pay-per-view.
If it holds together.
True. I mean, again, that's like the eternal caveat at this point. So there's...
Everyone gets angry when I talk about regulating training camps.
Yeah.
Do we want to address what happened with Neil Magny here?
Since we're talking fights, hang on. Let's talk briefly.
Okay.
Tyron Woodley fell out of the fight with the rematch with Robbie Lawler.
Now, I don't know if this is true. Ariel Helwani posted on his Twitter that a bout agreement had never even been signed for that fight. And it was the headliner for ESPN 3.
That actually wouldn't surprise me. Just to be quite honest. B, that being said, if they had verbal agreements in place and they were just like finalizing, fees or whatnot, or there were just some other stuff that we're negotiating prior to the actual event.
I think if you make the poster and you advertise it, you should have something written down. Something should be written in writing.
Well, I mean, that would be a smart business practice, but this is not the first time the UFC has had that particular issue.
Granted, Woodley's injured and out of the fight anyway, but it just sounds very... I hesitate.
The UFC's not afraid to put public pressure on fighters by just promoting them for events that they haven't signed for. They've done that in the past.
I don't want to call it a Bush League move, but I think it's kind of like an amateurish move, to do that.
It's not my favorite thing.
What was that?
It's not my favorite thing at all, but...
So yeah, Woodley's out of that fight. Lawler, as of now, is still in for the main event, but he does not have an opponent. So...
if RDA's down, we could do that quick turnaround to get the rematch between Lawler and Dos Anjos.
See, the good news for the UFC here is that the fight is June 29th, so they have a little bit of time.
They have a little over a month, yeah.
So
Uh,
let this happen now instead of like the week of, because then they'd be up. Well, look, Damian Maia's already booked for the card. Do you want Damian Maia versus Lawler?
Not especially. Lawler's fighting. Maya's fighting Anthony Rocco Martin, and frankly, I am more interested in that fight than I would be in Maya versus Lawler.
What about Martin fighting Lawler?
I mean, that'd be a big step up for Martin.
He's on a winning streak.
He is, and it's not a trivial one. I mean, it's a Robbie Lawler fight. Like, there's a degree of me that's just always going to be interested in the Robbie Lawler fight.
See.
So you could bump up either of those two into that, and it could be, and you could kind of make it make sense. What else do we have for the rankings?
Who is not booked right now?
And
Askren is booked.
Yeah, Askren and Masvidal are booked.
What is Darren? Is Darren Till booked?
I don't think Darren Till is booked yet. Stephen Thompson isn't booked.
I don't know if Thompson would take that fight.
I mean,
Ponzinibbio.
Again, I think they might have plans for Ponzinibbio later in the year, but look, if they can get him to sign, you put Ponzinibbio and Robbie Lawler in a cage, sign me up, man. Those two will swing.
You know, I like Ponzinibbio, right? And I'm like, I feel like he's been denied this for quite a while. Like, he's been doing good for a while.
Yeah, again, if they can all agree on that, as far as just being a fight, Ponzinibbio and Lawler, oh yeah, I am down for that.
Scenario, Mike Perry.
Perry's chirped about it, and I mean, look, is Perry the most deserving meritocratically? No, but would Perry and Lawler just be a great blood and guts brawl? Yeah. Again, I lean towards Ponzinibbio, but
Paul Felder, what weight is he fighting at now? Oh, lightweight. He's back at lightweight, so I think either of those would be good fights, quite frankly. If Felder would go up, but
didn't Felder sign something recently?
He might have.
I think I remember hearing that he had or was in talks for it.
He fought James Vick at ESPN 1. I don't think he's.
Well, he had that broken rib that like punctured a lung after that too.
He's got his next fight yet, so. Just from an optics standpoint, like they could just do, okay, here's Mike Perry, Lawler, violence. Like I could see that.
Hey, I'm down for Perry Lawler violence.
I don't know if Lawler would agree to it, but it could, from a fan-friendly standpoint, that could possibly work.
Well, again, you brought up Ponzinibbio, and Ponzinibbio hasn't had a boring fight, so.
I love Ponzinibbio, and I want to. I mean.
I would if that timing works out, if there's not some other issue we're not aware of, Ponzinibbio and Lawler is probably the best thing they could do given the available options.
Give Ponzinibbio a shot already,
If you go further down the list, I know he pulled out of the Magny fight with a minor injury, but if he's healthy in time, I mean, Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, or Vicente Luque, who won yesterday.
Right.
So Dos Santos, Luque, Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio is actually ranked above Lawler. So
I guess it's just who's healthy right now, who's ready to fight. Sorry.
Again, if you can make it work, give me Ponzinibbio and Lawler. I'm down for that. Yeah,
but is Ponzinibbio healthy and is he ready for a fight yet?
Again, if that's an available option, in my estimation, that's the best available option.
I agree. So Ponzinibbio would be my first choice. Mike Perry would probably be would probably be second. Just okay, we can't get Ponzinibbio, just book a bloody brawl.
Yeah. And again, as a fan of violence, I'm never going to complain about Robbie Lawler and Mike Perry. Those two are maniacs, and I love them for it. So, but that does, again, so we don't have a main event now for UFC on ESPN 3. The rest of that card is There's a few decent fights there, but
There's a flyweight fight.
Between Jussier Formiga and Joseph Benavidez. Look, I said this before. They're just going to cut the loser and make the winner fight at bantamweight. We all know you're not keeping this division, guys. Dana White came out and said, yeah, we're going to keep flyweight, so we know it's gone.
It's like the railway to nowhere.
Oh, God. And again, I know Dana White's made some noise about, yeah, we're going to keep 125. You're full of crap. I don't know why you're saying it, but...
Can Formiga even fight at bantamweight?
I mean, he'd be a very, very middling bantamweight. He's just too small. I mean, frankly, at this point, I know Benavidez had a run at bantamweight earlier, but given the way the division has developed since his run at bantamweight, he might be too small to find sustained success at bantamweight at this point.
Yeah. The way it's panned out now, and he's much older now.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'm not knocking Benavidez's skills, but even when he had his good runs at bantamweight, he was visibly the smaller fighter in all of...
His run at the top at bantamweight was, what, 10 years ago? About that long, right?
Probably more. Jeez.
And he was doing good at bantamweight when he first, but he was one of the early adopters into flyweight, so...
He was an advocate for that division being introduced in the first place.
Right. But
because he knew you talk to him now, he knows he's a small bantamweight.
He was still top 5 when he moved down. He was still top 5. So he had that going. But that was years ago when he wasn't 34 years old.
And when bantamweight didn't look the way it looks now. Bantamweight looks a lot different now than it did then. Right.
So tough.
It is. It's a really tough spot. I feel bad for a lot of the flyweights who put on good fights. You know, there's a lot of very talented guys in that division, and the UFC's released a bunch of them. I mean, the UFC's official flyweight rankings at this point, I think, have guys in the top 15 who have either yet to debut or have one or have 2 fights. It just sucks. But there's a few other decent kind of fights on that card. Vince Pichel and Roosevelt Roberts will probably be fun.
Chas Skelly is fighting. I like Chas Skelly.
Chas Skelly is good for a scrap. Justin Ledette's fighting, which can be pretty good. Jared Gordon's fighting, and Jared Gordon I don't think has had a boring fight in the UFC thus far. So it's not a bad card. It's not. They're really relying on the main event to kind of sell you on it, but it's not the worst card in the world. All right. I don't think any other major fights kind of got announced or discussed lately. So yeah, I suppose we can talk a little bit about Neil Magny if you'd like.
So he was supposed to fight last night, but he was pulled because of an apparent failed drug test with USADA. He was in the co-main event.
Yeah, he was supposed to fight Luque.
He released a statement. As many of you know, I had to withdraw from my scheduled bout against Vicente Luque on Saturday, May 18th. I want to apologize to him. Blah, blah, blah. I am not afraid to admit when I am in the wrong. On Saturday, May 11th, I received an email from USADA stating that I had been flagged due to an out-of-competition drug test. The flag was due to a metabolite of the substance dihydroxy-LGD-4033. I have fully cooperated with USADA thus far to determine how this substance was found in the sample I have provided them on May 5th. So it's not. So I guess it's one of those cases where it's a provisional suspension, and there is a due process situation here. So he will be allowed to argue his case, I imagine.
Yeah. And again, there's a lot of evidence still to be gathered, and I'm not gonna. I mean, look, I won't throw fighters under the bus. For this, because I'm prepared to wait for the totality of evidence to come out. But
significant are metabolites, Robert?
Well,
because it wasn't until
it
wasn't until the last few years that I started hearing about metabolites.
They're pretty. I mean, for some reason, I don't know why no one phrased it the way they did before, but that's always kind of been what they find when the vast majority of drug testing. They very rarely find a synthetic substance that you inject just floating out in your body because your body absorbs it, metabolizes it,
Right.
and puts it to use. What you find are the remnants of and evidence that it has been absorbed into your body. So that's kind of always what it was.
The wording never used metabolites in these statements until fairly recently.
I don't know if that was just a general push to be more correct with the language or what, but I think a lot of it started because when you're talking about a lot of PEDs, it's people just kind of I don't know if there were just a general understanding that what we found was mostly metabolites rather than the active substance in your body, or there was just a lack of scientific literacy. I think a lot of it started with when a lot of the kind of controversy sprang up around the marijuana testing that was done in MMA. And so now I think now it's just in an effort to be more accurate with the language that they present as far as that goes, rather than, so I agree. It's definitely a more recent trend as far as that goes. I think Neil Magny's going to have a bit of a hard road to go here because the substance he failed for is I believe it's an estrogen blocker. So it's the theory being that it would be primarily a cycling component, by which I mean something that helps you cycle if you're on synthetic hormones. I'd have to double check. It might be an estrogen booster rather than suppressor.
Wikipedia says it's an investigational selective androgen receptor modulator for treatment of conditions such as muscle wasting and osteoporosis.
This is a full-blown steroid, for the record. Like anything that is primarily used to treat wasting diseases, because steroids promote muscle growth. That's what they're supposed to do.
But some guys are proving.
I mean, Anderson got off with a slap on the wrist for a very powerful SARM. Like, there's not a lot of consistency here around this.
But some guys are having success with the whole tainted supplement route.
If they can prove it, then fair play. For those of you unfamiliar with the procedure when a fighter claims a tainted supplement, they do not. The investigative process does not take the fighter at their word. They test the material that the fighter has. They then go independently and buy a segment of that same product from the same batch. So again, if you're not familiar with the process, you make a bunch of this crap, you fill it all into bottles, you sell it at GNC or whatever. But it all comes from a specific batch number. So when they test these, they go buy another separate instance of whatever the material in question is. So say, I don't know the names of any of these things. So for the sake of conversation, let's say, I don't know, Muscle Boost. There's probably something stupid named that. So if that's something that Magny is saying is tainted, they'll test his like what he has to make sure that it's actually in there, not just
Cialis from a Chinese website.
Oh God, let's not go into that. Then they go buy another bottle of this same material from the same batch independently and test it for that and test that particular sample as a means of establishing that this was contaminated at the source rather than simply by the fighter, by the fighter or their camp. It would, and there's still a few other things they do, but that's part of the procedure here. So again, I'm prepared to see if this other samples of the same batch for this same supplement come back tainted, then Neil Magny will have he will have again at that point provably taken a tainted supplement, and that sucks. And I am glad that USADA does actually investigate this crap. So again, I'm prepared to wait until all the evidence comes out, but at the same time, this is of all the materials that you tend to fail for with the tainted supplement excuse, this is a pretty gnarly one. So I hope that's all it is for Neil Magny's sake, because
he was chosen one. He was supposed to be the future champion, Neil Magny.
Look, I had people within the Neil Magny fan club reach out, of which I used to be president, reach out to me and vehemently deny all of this. They're calling it a witch hunt. They are not prepared to accept. They are prepared to support an investigation because they do not believe that Neil Magny is guilty of this particular charge. So, again, and I'm prepared to let the investigation run its course. You know, that's why we have these procedures in place. So we'll see what happens. But
all right, moving on from that, former champion Conor McGregor has had one of his legal issues resolved, because I think he has multiple legal issues going on right now.
Depending on where you are in the world, yeah.
And this is the one over the cell phone breakage thing.
Oh yeah, they dropped the charges on that.
Charges were dropped over that, according to the Miami Herald.
Dude will probably sue Conor, get a small settlement fee, or the court will order to pay him the cost of replacing the phone, something stupid like that. So
prosecutors dropped charges of robbery by sudden snatching and criminal mischief after the victim stopped cooperating with prosecutors. Khalil Madani, the prosecutor, announced the move in court on Monday. The victim of the crime does not wish to return to the U.S. and prosecute his case. So this is resolved, but I think Conor still has multiple things going on here that are yet to be resolved. So
there's still stuff he's being investigated for, but you know, again, I believe that was the felony that was reduced in this instance. So
I think we kind of expected this, though. I don't think we.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect him to be convicted of a felony. I expected something small, you know, again, something along these lines. I mean, not to accuse any impropriety here, but it wouldn't shock me if Conor just like mailed the guy a check to replace the damaged property in exchange for him contributing to the charges being dropped. And in fairness,
or his manager could have done that.
Again, like I say Conor McGregor, not necessarily him personally, but you know, someone associated with the business of Conor McGregor. Right. And look, that's all that I think would be fair in this situation. Is, you know, you broke my phone, you jackass. Replace it.
I'm not a big Conor McGregor fan, but I can't, you know, the way I read about it, I didn't really fault him that much for this, even though I do think he's a nutcase.
I mean, like my thing is just, all right, you did something stupid. You destroyed someone else's property. I don't like that. You know, you compensate the guy for the damages.
The way I heard about the alleged victim here, he didn't really sound like a kind of choir boy to me. He didn't come off as great.
It's Miami. Their choir boys aren't even choir boys.
It sounds like he wasn't even a Miami native, because they make it sound like he wasn't even a U.S. citizen. There's a prosecutor saying he does not want to return to the U.S. So whatever that means.
I didn't see the statement personally. That could also mean that could also be in reference to Conor not wanting to come back.
The alleged victim, Ahmed Abdurzak, lives in England. And Madani said that Abdurzak, who lives in England, recanted his story.
Okay. So
take that for what it's worth.
Given the video evidence we have at this point, all that means is he decided he didn't want to continue with, for whatever reason.
He threatened by someone in his entourage.
I don't know. He could have been threatened again. He could have been paid off. He could have just had a change of heart. He could have decided he just doesn't want to travel all the way back to the United States to deal deal with all the
lawsuit.
He did, but he also might not have known how long it was going to take. And again, I imagine there was a fair bit of just, you know what, you broke my phone. That's not cheap. Please replace it. And then if that was
smartphones are not cheap, folks.
I mean, look, this has been mentioned before, but the statute, the difference between destruction of property being a misdemeanor and destruction of property being a felony is purely established by the monetary value of the item being destroyed. every single smartphone costs enough to constitute a felony if you destroy someone else's property. So be aware of that, guys. Get into a fight and you break someone's phone, there might be something else attached to that. Just throwing it out there. But yeah, I mean, that was a lot. There was a lot of nothing there for me from a legal standpoint, from a PR standpoint and whatnot. I mean, this was kind of always what was going to happen. It was going to get reduced. He was either going to get off or take a very, very minor plea, reimburse the guy for the damages he caused, and we were all going to move on with our lives. All right. Anything else that came up this week? Because I'm drawing a. Did we talk about Diaz and Pettis last week? Or was that this week that got announced?
I think that was this week. I think it was right after.
Well, if we talked about it last week, it's not going to kill.
I don't think we did.
I don't mind talking about it briefly. Then it's a big fight.
If it happens.
If it happens, don't get me again. There's only so much we can,
Who do you favor in that fight, though?
That's a tough one, man. I can see how each guy wins. Like this is one of those instances. Pettis has very good kicks. He fights from either stance. He has good leg kicks. He has good body kicks. And Nate Diaz is allergic to leg kicks. But Pettis is also he's not a combination guy. He's a sniper. He's one and done. And
he's hittable.
He's hittable. He struggles with pressure. He struggles with guys bigger and longer than he is. Stephen Thompson, prior to getting knocked out, was giving him all kinds of problems with just a jab, more than anything else. If Nate can keep his leg from being completely compromised, I can see him walking Pettis down and just kind of boxing and beating him up. I think that's a very, very possible outcome.
If the fight happens, and that is the operative word here, which we have to use if in this case. If it happens, I'm probably going to pick Diaz, but we'll see. I don't have a lot of faith it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you look at those two. I will say this in favor of Nate Diaz. Nate's, again, got a history, has earned a history. But when he signs on the dotted line, when he actually signs a bout agreement, I think he always shows up. Getting him to sign is a problem, but once he does agree to fight, I believe he's always shown up to fight. I don't think he's ever pulled out of a fight.
I don't know why they just don't do the trilogy fight with McGregor.
I don't know either, but
it just seems to be that would be the best choice for both. Oh, well, McGregor's technically retired, a yuck, but it seems like that would be the best move for both guys right now.
I agree. I mean, it's a big fight that will do a lot of business. The winner gets their career back on track in a fairly significant way. I mean, Conor just got smashed pretty definitively by Khabib. Nate, what was Nate's last fight even? Jeez, was it the McGregor fight?
The McGregor rematch.
Yeah, so Nate gets a trilogy win over the biggest star in the sport. I mean, again, I agree that fight makes a lot of sense at this moment in time for all parties concerned.
Granted, the fight I really want is McGregor versus Cerrone, but
that would be nice.
Considering that Conor isn't champion anymore and he's not fighting for the belt, the fight's there. It's there and it makes sense.
I mean, yeah, it's there, it makes sense, and it makes a lot of dollars. I mean,
yeah.
Let me be clear about this. I don't care for either of the McGregor-Diaz fights. I know, like the second one when it was going down, Twitter was freaking out. I was completely nonplussed by that fight.
So was I.
And again, maybe it's just I don't know why. It's not a bad fight. I'm not going to pretend that it's terrible.
My problem at the time, Conor was a champion and he wasn't like,
Yeah, I didn't like it. I didn't like the circumstances, and even without the circumstances, that fight, I don't think it was even in my top 5 for the year, quite frankly. But a lot of people loved it, and I'm not going to pretend that I speak for the masses here. I don't. A lot of people loved those two fights. A lot of people like McGregor. A lot of people like Nate Diaz. There's a lot of money to be made there.
I think I don't know. When would this Diaz Pettis fight happen? Is it 241?
The Anaheim card. I forget what number that is. 241.
Would it be a non-title 3-round fight? Would Diaz be okay with that?
I mean, he's signed, so
he must be getting a cut of, well,
whatever he's getting something. I mean, that'll probably be your co-main event, Pettis and Diaz.
It's just that I don't know how Diaz feels about ESPN Plus pay-per-view buys right now, but I guess we'll see.
You know,
go ahead.
Nate might be more amenable to taking a bigger cut just up front rather than pay-per-view points.
If the UFC is willing to pay him that, I say good for him.
And I mean, again, he's signed, so they came to some kind of agreement on the terms.
We don't know what he signed. This could be another verbal agreement situation here, for all we know.
Also true. Although the last time the UFC tried that with Nate, he immediately and publicly denied it.
So this card would likely be headlined by Cormier versus Stipe.
Yep. With, again, Diaz and Pettis as your co-main event, and then Romero and Costa as the featured bout.
All right, provided Costa doesn't have any more.
Hold on. Let's throw Costa in there, too. Like, these two guys.
Yeah.
I mean, again, you mentioned the eye test. If that's the arbiter, neither of them pass. Those are jacked human beings.
I agree. So, I like the matchup on paper.
It's a really good step up for Costa. It's a really good fight for Romero to keep him relevant in the middleweight division. I like the fight. I really do. I lean towards Romero, but
Cormier in the rematch over Stipe.
Yeah, I do. Again, it's not that Stipe is incapable of winning this fight, but the holes in DC's game are not holes that Stipe has historically exploited against anyone. Cormier's striking defense, especially against punches, is pretty solid. It's a little bit unorthodox. It's kind of the old mummy guard, which I think George Foreman rather popularized if you go back in boxing. It's a lot of straight arms that just either pick off punches or just make them deflect as the lanes that you're trying to punch through become really, really awkward. Turns out it sucks at protecting you from head kicks, and that's not just a knock at DC. That's a flaw in that defensive style. Generally, he is not the only one who's used it to some success only to be kicked in the head.
I still believe the only guy who can beat DC right now is John Jones.
If it's not Stipe, if Stipe can't, and again, I favor DC, but Stipe is the only other guy I give a legitimate shot to.
I think Cormier would have Ngannou for lunch.
Oh yeah.
I think he would destroy it.
as long as Ngannou doesn't land that big uppercut as DC's entering, yeah. Like Ngannou has one shot.
I think Ngannou could land it and DC would still win.
I don't know. DC's got a really good chin. He might. But I mean, look, Ngannou versus Cormier plays out almost identically to Cormier versus Derek Lewis.
I think he would destroy Overeem if he were to actually fight Overeem.
That's one of the ones that, again, just based on styles, Overeem can kick, and Overeem can knee, and Cormier doesn't like to get hit in the body. Like if there's a few issues with Cormier, again, he's not great at blocking head kicks because of and that's just some of the style he's adopted. He has decided to sacrifice that defensive element in exchange for being much better at dealing with punches. How often do we see
Overeem actually land good kicks though in the UFC?
He's more selective with them, but he throws them. And the other issue with DC is he is a bit soft to the body. And Overeem is nasty to the body. Again, do I favor DC in that matchup? Yeah, pretty significantly. But if there's someone who just, again, stylistically is poised to give him problems, Overeem timing those nasty knees as DC enters it into the body, as DC tries to enter the clinch or just close distance, that body work has given him problems in the past. But again, I would favor him pretty significantly. Yeah, again, I don't think there's anyone at heavyweight right now who gives him a lot of problems. I think there's a reason he's looking at retirement, and part of that is there's not a lot of challenges for him left that he can reasonably expect to achieve, to overcome at least. But yeah, again, 241's a pretty decent card right now on paper, at least. Again, we don't have a lot of fights for it, but assuming the ones that we do have hold together, that's a good top 3 fights for a card. Let me see. Anything else we wanted to touch on? Because I think they got done fleshing out 239 a couple of weeks ago. I think we've talked about all those fights. That's a good card. It's a really good card. 238. We talked about Cerrone versus Ferguson being added. 238's that's a hardcore fans card, but it's pretty good. There's not a lot of fat on that card. Oh god, just very briefly, they put out a couple of hype videos for 238 last night on the event, and the one they had for Ferguson versus Cerrone was pretty darn good. It just made me even more annoyed that fight's only 3 rounds instead of 5. Give Tony Ferguson and Donald Cerrone 5 rounds to kill each other. Come on. I don't think that fight's going the distance, but it's the principle of the thing. I think that's everything. So, unless there's something else that comes to your mind, Jeff.
Nope.
Alrighty then, what would you like to plug?
All right, so this week I will be reviewing one of the most anticipated movies of the year, Disney's live-action remake of Aladdin. Another review I have coming up is Rocket Man, which is the biopic for Elton John.
Sir Elton John. Thank
you.
Sir
Elton John. I'm sorry, Sir Elton. Also, we'll be reviewing Godzilla, King of the Monsters, the following week. Also this week, I'm heading to Las Vegas. I am credentialed and will be covering for the site Double or Nothing, and for All Elite Wrestling, and possibly some of StarCast as well. Just mapping out my schedule now. So very excited. Hopefully it'll be easy to figure out and get a handle on things, but I will be heading to Vegas to check those out, and we'll be having some updates, social media updates, some coverage from the events, so please look forward to that. Also, on the 411 Wrestling Interviews podcast, you can check out my latest interviews with Eli Drake. Excuse me, not Eli Drake, Low-Key and Mike Kanellis, which are out right now. You can listen to those on iTunes and YouTube. So check out the 411 Wrestling Interviews podcast. The 2 most recent interviews, Low-Key, Mike Kanellis. Mike Kanellis had a very good interview talking about his addiction issues, becoming part of 205 Live. I think they were very good interviews. Low-Key is very intimidating, Robert.
The man won't break kayfabe.
No. An interesting interview nonetheless. Nonetheless. But I'm a big fan of Low-Key, but it's still hard not to get intimidated when you talk to him over the phone. So, but I enjoy it.
He's got one of those voices, man. You hear that when you hear his voice, like, okay.
I feel like
there's darkness there, man. You've done some stuff.
I felt like he could end my life just by talking to me. Like I felt he could destroy me just through the phone line, basically. That's kind of the vibe you get from Low-Key.
Yeah, and again, Low-Key's dude. He's been around, man, for a long time.
I think I like Detective Pikachu more than you, though.
I have not seen it, so I cannot comment.
But the movie I really did not like was Tolkien, which I also reviewed. Just a really bad pedestrian worse than pedestrian biopic. Like, why did you even make this? I will say this. I really hope Nicholas Hoult is never going to play Batman. He is the last person I want playing Batman Bruce Wayne. I know people may not be too hot on Robert Pattinson. I think of the lot that's being considered, he's the best choice.
That just tells you about the lot they're considering.
Well, who would you want to be a younger Batman at this point?
That's a fair question.
If you could name one or two, I'd be fine with that. Christian Bale is not 30 years old anymore.
I know. If you wanted to continue the trend of like British guys doing it, Charlie Hunnam might be an interesting Batman.
Charlie Hunnam is pushing 40.
I know, but he doesn't look it, which is kind of the weird thing. Hang on.
No to Charlie Hunnam. I'm sorry.
Look, if I have his body when I'm his age, I will be a happy man.
The dude's freaking yoked, and he's a decent act. I don't think he's a good fit for Bruce Wayne anyway, quite frankly.
Jeez. I don't know. How young are they going? Like this is part of the consideration here.
Late 20s, early 30s, basically.
Now, actual late 20s, early 30s, or can play late 20s, early 30s?
I mean, Pattinson is 33 at this point, so I'm thinking they're trying to get play late 20s, early 30s, basically. Which is probably what they should have done with Zack Snyder, but Zack Snyder's just
who was
disaster.
Oh god, you know what? Frankly, if I were doing this, I might go with someone just really off the. Who's that terrible guy? Hang on. Oh god, that would be hilarious. Okay, let me be clear about this. I know this is a bad idea, but I would laugh at it anyway. Garrett Hedlund would just make me. I would die laughing, but that's kind of the point.
I could kill you for this.
Oh, come on. You don't want to see the guy who was just a manic version of Captain Hook in that terrible Pan adaptation.
I mean, I don't hate Garrett Hedlund or anything, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was looked at either, quite frankly.
He probably was.
Was not a fan of that. I mean...
Pan? Oh, God. Pan's awful.
What about Tron Legacy?
It was what it was. I think I expected too much of it.
That came out in 2010 too. Jeez.
Yeah.
At least, I mean, yeah, I would accept. I could accept Robert Pattinson at this point because honestly, I have seen him in a couple decent films.
I have a major bone to pick with Robert Pattinson, and believe it or not, it's not the Twilight franchise.
Well, what is it?
Water for Elephants. Because seriously,
that was actually a fairly successful film.
Yeah, but it wasn't good.
Okay.
Look, again, I've said this before. The presence of Christoph Waltz has led me towards a lot of bad movies. That's one of them.
Like Green Hornet?
No. Even Christoph Waltz could not get me to watch Green Hornet.
Now, so yeah, I would accept Pattinson at this point because you may have forgotten a lot of people trashed Heath Ledger's casting as the Joker.
I remember that. I was one of them.
Okay. Did you hate now? Did you dislike his Joker?
No, loved it. Loved it to death.
Okay, so and I'll tell you something else. I love Chris Evans as Captain America, Steve Rogers. Love. And when he first got cast, I was very unconvinced. Because I'll tell you this much. I hated the live-action Fantastic Four films by Tim Story, and I did not like his Johnny Storm at all.
No, there's nothing good about those movies.
So, and he totally dedicated himself to that character, undeniably. I don't think even you can deny that.
No, and again, it's one of those things as far as Pattinson goes. Like, I may not like it, but I'm not gonna do something stupid like sign an online petition or get bent out of shape over it. Like, fine, I have my concerns and I'm not interested. I didn't enjoy. I didn't. I'm like the only guy here I know that's gonna say this. I didn't especially care for Ben Affleck's version of Batman.
I didn't love it either.
I mean, being the second best thing about Batman v Superman is not a massive credential. And then, I mean, he was terrible in Dawn of Justice, but sorry, in Justice League.
Right.
So I don't know how. I don't know. Like I can really blame anyone for that.
Can get over the fact that they didn't think about the Martha thing, because that killed the character. It was embarrassing because that became a meme, and that became the story. The fact that they put that in there.
Yeah.
And that pretty much ruined Ben Affleck, and then the sad Affleck thing kind of ruined him.
Look, Ben Affleck did a lot of damage to himself as
well.
I
just can't get over why he did it when he, his career was in the toilet for a while, and then he like single-handedly revived his career, became a legit filmmaker, an award-winning filmmaker, and then he goes and plays, superhero again, when that's what kind of got him in trouble the first time. I just don't get it. I doubt he was hurting for money at that point. It's just it's still crazy. It's still crazy to me. But yeah, pretty much one word pretty much ruined his Batman forever. No matter, and look, I know people defend that scene, and there are defenders of Snyder, but by and large, people could not get over how dumb that was in this movie that's trying to be so ultra serious and dark and gritty. To have that whole Martha thing, it was embarrassing, like seriously.
And it was out of place to begin with, and even if you wanted to include it, there's better ways to execute.
Like if you're a comic fan who's been reading these things since you could read and were a kid, it's like Zack Snyder finally stumbled on comic books and he was looking at the history of these characters. Wait a minute. Bruce Wayne's mother's name is Martha. Superman's mother's name is also Martha. That's the key. That's the connection. Like, by God. That's the thing that solves this whole thing. All right, so that's our tangent for the week. I had a lot of fun. Robert, thanks for all you do, and I will see you all in Vegas.
All right. As for me, let's see. Next week we'll be back here with a preview of Fight Night 153. That's the UFC on ESPN Plus 11 card. They're in Sweden. It's an early afternoon card for those of us here in the States, depending on where you are specifically. This card is designed to annoy me, I'm fairly sure. There's 4 light heavyweight fights on this card. I don't know what I did. I really don't. But we'll preview that next week, so I'll be enjoying my Saturday off. Last week, there was a review for Detective Pikachu that I was a part of, even though I didn't see the movie. So weird. Didn't see any promotion for that movie. Then Mark gets on the thing and yells at me about the show this evening, and now there's Detective Pikachu, and I don't know. So you can listen to that. Myself, Mark Radulich, Alexis Haina, and I think David Wright was there with us. We talked a little bit about Detective Pikachu, good, bad, and otherwise. This Tuesday on Damn You Hollywood, Mark and I will be discussing John Wick Chapter 3, and I'm debating how much energy I'm going to have for that show. Just because if I really want to get into it, I know that Mark and I are going to have another shouting match. And I know I can win, because I know I'm right in this case. But I haven't seen it yet. I will before I review it. And I enjoy the John Wick franchise. I think most martial arts fans enjoy the John Wick franchise. So I'm curious to see what Chapter 3 holds for us. And
I liked Chapter 3, but some of the fight scenes just went on forever.
I mean, the whole movie is designed to be that. Like,
I mean,
I'm more annoyed I'm more annoyed when they don't have action sequences in John Wick.
I like them, but a couple of them just went on and on and on and on and on. Like the first one, I almost liked the first one the most because it was like,
Well, the first one's the best.
huh?
The first one is the best, in my estimation.
The movie, I mean the first fight scene in the third movie was like my favorite one because it lasted like a minute, and then all the the movie was a lot longer than I expected too. But now the franchise is it's just blowing up. It's like the first three Bourne movies that just kept getting more and more successful. But go ahead.
So yeah, we'll be reviewing that on Tuesday. I think that's it for me, though. I can't remember if it's this Friday or next Friday that we're going to be reviewing the Netflix Ted Bundy series with Zac Efron as Bundy. I haven't seen that yet either, but we'll see it prior to actually reviewing it. That will be on a Friday. It will be me, Mark, and I think Pat Mullen is going to join us for that one. And then again, next Sunday, back here to preview Fight Night 153, so I hope you'll all join us for that. You can follow the 411 Podcasting Network on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. Say iTunes. I might have, but I'm saying it again anyway. Whatever you're listening to us on, you can find the rest of the shows here. Please, again, give us a follow, like, subscribe, hurl insults. Not at each other. Usually reserve that for me. Always appreciated. We are trying to keep this thing going. So thank you all very much. Until then, on behalf of Jeff, I'm Robert. I'll see you next week. Until then, please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.